I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Joy Morrissey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I start by wishing you a very happy Easter and thanking the clerks, the doorkeepers, and the House staff who have won the short end of the straw by still having to be here at the end for the adjournment debate. And I'm pleased to have secured this adjournment debate on hospice funding, a topic which I know draws concern from across this House. Even on the last day of term, it still gives pause to so many, and hospice provides a beacon of hope for so many people in their darkest times. It provides that comfort, that knowledge, the way that you can walk through a very difficult time. Without hospice support, many would be lost. And that is why you see across the country, Madam Deputy Speaker, volunteers giving up their time, giving up their finances to support local hospices, because primarily they are a charity. And although they receive some funding from the NHS, many charities and many of these hospices are actually charities. And I think across this House, from every party, Madam Deputy Speaker, we believe that hospice and hospices matter. Happily give way.
Madam, first of all, can I commend the Honourable Lady for Beaconsfield for bringing this forward. She's absolutely right to highlight the work of hospice, but also for the hospice, it's all those groups who make the money to give to the hospice so they can do the work. And for instance, Madam Deputy Speaker, I mentioned the Elim Church who do a cancer group dinner breakfast every month. They just recently gave £5,000 from a coffee morning on their monthly offering. Again, we see it charitable organisations supported by churches in particular, I want to mention, make the difference in this nation. Does Honourable Lady not agree that whilst admirable, we cannot expect coffee mornings and fun runs to fund what government has an obligation to do? And that rather than seek to end life, government must seek to ensure that the last days of palliative care are dignified, pain-free, and this only comes with a fully funded end of life palliative care.
Morrissey.
Thank you for that intervention, and I'd like to pay tribute to all the volunteers who organize the fun runs, to volunteers in my constituency like Sharon Williams, who does the Thames Hospice walk in Denham Village every year, and those are the people that help support our local hospices, and it is a point that we should all pay tribute to. And hospices matter, because each year they support 310,000 people and 92,000 family members. Hospices matter because they are vital, holistic care services for people and their loved ones at the end of their life. Hospices matter because they provide crucial end-of-life and overall healthcare provision, relieving the pressure on the NHS, both community specialist and acute care. But I suspect that the Minister and the government already know this, and I'm sure that they agree that hospices matter. So let me now turn to why this debate matters. The hospice sector is under enormous pressure. It faces an unprecedented challenge. The sector is caught in the triple squeeze of increased demand, increased cost, and uncertain funding. Only the government has the power to change that squeeze. Only the government can eliminate those increased costs or create more certain funding. In this House, we have seen a debate and months consumed in recent months by a debate about assisted dying, whilst the real scandal of our lack of support for end-of-life care through hospices goes below the radar. It is estimated the demand for palliative care in the UK will increase by 25% in the next 25 years. But as hospices face this increased demand, the government have decided to saddle them with increased cost and failed to provide a long-term settlement. Let me speak now about the excellent Thames Hospice that supports many families in my constituencies and those of my neighbours. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I would not be here today if it wasn't for the other place, our Baroness May of Maidenhead, who came to me because she was a long-term champion of Thames Hospice and asked me to have a word with them because they were so concerned about their funding, which I did, which led to this debate today. So again, it is members of Parliament from both houses that continue to champion this important cause. And I met recently with Dr. Rachel Decaux, the CEO of Thames Hospice, and like many other hospices, Thames Hospice represents the very best of our communities. People who believe in providing a quality of life to the end of life for everyone. Passionate people who care, like the Thames Hospice Denham Support Group and volunteers who make those donations and support those who enter into Thames Hospice. Through their excellent work, they enable 80% of people they support to receive dignified end-of-life care in their home, and the rest in their specialized inpatient service. And I recently visited this service and was so moved by the call center, where I saw volunteers and staff working around the clock to help those who had just received a terminal diagnosis or families that couldn't cope. And they were going to their homes, they were working all hours of the day and night to make sure that people had the support they needed, and people had the pain support and the palliative care they needed in home or in the center. But Thames Hospice, like many hospices, faces a critical moment. Less than 1/3 of their income comes from the NHS. Like many hospices, they raise the rest through their charity shops, fundraising efforts, and generosity of private donors. But the Chancellor's budget was like a hammer blow to their finances. They're facing up to a £1 million deficit, largely through choices imposed by this government. The national insurance tax rate, from which this government recently voted against the opportunity to spare hospices, will add £300,000 to their costs for the next financial year. The national minimum wage, another £200,000, both through the direct impact and the need to maintain pay differentials. Meeting the NHS pay settlement, which they need to do to keep clinical staff, but again, to do without government support, and it adds further £100,000. Finally, their suppliers, facing the same cost pressures, are passing those on to Thames Hospice at higher prices. Now, I know the Minister will talk about the settlement of £1 million, additional funding to the hospices announced in December. But let's set out the detail about that money. It was for capital expenditure, welcome, I am sure, by hospices, but not to support operational cost pressures. It was also split across 170 hospices, meaning it became a drop in the ocean in their individual needs. I will give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Will she please join me in commending Compton Care Hospice in my constituency of Wolverhampton West, whom I visited recently. They do great work themselves in raising funds, and they really welcomed the £100 million support that this government has provided. But it was also emphasised that if they weren't there to provide the social care, the therapy, respite care for patients and their families, the NHS would need to have an extra 100 beds available. So they provide invaluable services to the community, and it makes it so much more important for us to continue hospices as much as we possibly can.
Joy Morrissey.
My friend makes an excellent point about the pressure that hospices take off the NHS, and the wonderful work of your local my friend's hospice is the reason why the NHS can function in the way that it does. And I think that point of the cost savings involved in palliative care, both in a hospital setting and an out-of-hospital care provision setting, is invaluable. And to use an existing model like a hospice in the constituency of myself or of any of the members opposite, it is a model that already works, that is trusted by the community, and I think we should be funding that model, not allowing them to die on the vine because of the lack of funding and the changing to the funding model. So thank you for that. Yes.
I'm so grateful to my honourable friend, and I do congratulate her on getting this debate. But not just to complain about this terrible new tax that's been applied to hospices, but to point out to the Minister, and I hope the Minister will respond to this point when he winds up the debate, that the return on investment for the taxpayer from what hospices spend on the dying is very high indeed. In fact, if a little bit of money was transferred from the big increase the health service got to the hospices, and this has not happened to support their revenue, it would pay great dividends to the health service because it would save much more costly care in the hospitals. It's a 300% return, according to the St Helena Hospice, just outside my constituency, on whose behalf I am speaking this evening.
Joy Morrissey.
My honourable friend makes an excellent point that the cost benefit, the 300% cost benefit in the case mentioned, would be replicated across the country in every hospice setting. The small amount of money that could be given through the NHS funding model to hospices would be invaluable. Yeah. And we talk of palliative care and we talk about assisted dying, but why aren't we having a debate about increasing hospice funding and making it part of the NHS? If these hospice settings were part of the NHS, they would be exempt from the NICS increase. But right now, the NICS increase is devastating to hospices because many of them are funded through volunteers or low-paid workers in charity shops, and they're taking that money to pay for their hospice setting. Now, that is a wonderful model, but they are not exempt from the NICS increase like other NHS bodies are. Even changing their status to make them part of the NHS would go a very, very long way in making their financial model viable. I will.
I'm really grateful to the Honourable Member who's making an incredibly powerful speech. I've been steering through the Palliative Care Commission for the last 6 months, and one thing that has become crystallised in all of our minds is that the fundamental funding model is completely broken and not fit for purpose, but also the system needs to be far more integrated, because the reality is that a hospice is involved in part of somebody's care, not the entirety of a care. So does she believe that the findings of the Commission do need to steer the future funding of the hospice sector?
Joy Morrissey.
Thank you. And making that point is an excellent one, because we should be led by the evidence and what the Commission finds. And I would like to point out the long-term work that my friend opposite has done in championing out-of-hospital care provision, not just for palliative care, but for all adult social care. I recall many a debate where there was one or two of us in the chamber, and the member opposite, Madam Deputy Speaker, has always been one of them, a long-term champion of the vulnerable, of palliative care, and of those that desperately need better services. May I thank my friend opposite. And it isn't often, Madam Deputy Speaker, that you'll see me sort of reach across the House, but credit where credit is due. There are members from this House, from any side of the House, that have championed these causes over and over again, and it would only be right and fair that I recognize them today. And we face the real prospect, Madam Deputy Speaker, of collapse of the hospice sector with these changes, and that would be unimaginable. These are institutions that are trusted in our communities that we need to protect, that need additional funding from the NHS. And the government must act. And I urge them to please reconsider the national insurance changes, exempting them from the increase or providing funding support to their operating cost would make a material difference to their ability to survive. Madam Deputy Speaker, our hospices matter. And I hope the Minister will hear that message loud and clear and show the government understands how vital they are. Thank you.
Minister Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd really like to thank the Honourable Member for Beaconsfield for securing this very important debate. I'd like to take this opportunity to also thank all those who work or volunteer in the hospice and palliative care sector for the care and support that they provide to patients, families and loved ones when they need it most. This government wants a society where every person receives high-quality, compassionate care from diagnosis through to the end of life. We're determined to shift more care out of hospitals and into the community to ensure patients and their families receive personalised care in the most appropriate setting, and palliative and end-of-life care services, including hospices, will have a vital role to play in that shift. In England, integrated care boards are responsible for the commissioning of palliative and end-of-life care services to meet the needs of their local populations. To support ICBs in this duty, NHS England has published statutory guidance and service specifications. Whilst the majority of palliative and end-of-life care is provided by NHS staff and services, we recognise the vital part that voluntary sector organisations, including hospices, also play in providing support to people at end of life, as well as to their loved ones. Most hospices are charitable, independent organisations which receive some statutory funding for providing NHS services. The amount of funding each charitable hospice receives varies both within and between ICB areas. This variation is dependent on demand in that area and also on the totality and type of palliative and end-of-life care provision from both NHS and non-NHS services, including charitable hospices within each ICB footprint. We understand the financial pressures hospices have been facing, which is why this government announced the biggest investment into hospices in England in a generation, ensuring that hospices in England can continue to deliver the highest quality end-of-life care possible for their patients, families and loved ones. We're supporting the hospice sector with a £100 million capital funding boost for adult and children's hospices to ensure that they have the best possible physical environment for the care that they give. We are pleased to confirm that the government has released the first £25 million tranche of the £100 million capital funding, with Hospice UK kindly allocating and distributing the money to hospices throughout England. An additional £75 million will be allocated in the coming weeks for use in the 25-26 financial year. The £100 million capital funding will help hospices to provide the best end-of-life care to patients and their families in a supportive and dignified physical environment. Funding will help support hospices and deliver much needed funding for improvements, including refurbishments, overhauling IT systems and improving facilities for patients and visitors. We're also providing £26 million in revenue funding to support children and young people's hospices. This is a continuation of the funding which, until recently, was known as the Children and Young People's Hospice Grant. ICBs will once again administer the funding to their respective children and young people's hospices on behalf of NHS England. This is in line with the NHS devolution policies and it promotes a more consistent national approach and supporting commissioners in prioritising the palliative and end-of-life care needs of their local population. I am pleased to confirm that NHS England has now communicated the details of the 25-26 funding allocation and dissemination to individual hospices. I do accept that there is unwarranted variation and inequality in access to and quality of palliative and end-of-life care in England, but we are working to reduce these variations. NHS England has published statutory guidance and service specifications to support commissioners in prioritising palliative and end-of-life care. It has also developed a palliative and end-of-life care dashboard which brings together all relevant local data in one place. The dashboard helps commissioners to understand the palliative and end-of-life care needs of their local population, enabling ICBs to put plans in place to address and track the improvement of health inequalities, and to ensure that funding is distributed fairly and based on prevalence. NHS England has also published the Ambitions Framework, which sets out our vision to improve end-of-life care through partnership and collaborative action between organisations at local level throughout England. Additionally, NHS England has developed an assurance system with specific steps and deadlines to ensure the timely dissemination of the £26 million revenue funding to children's and young people's hospices, as we know that there were some quite significant problems in terms of the transmission from NHS England through the ICBs to the hospices last year. These steps include regular oversight sessions with ICBs, regions and hospices, giving ICBs a hard deadline within Q1 of the financial year by when they are expected to disseminate the funding to hospices, including escalating to NHS England if any ICB is unable to meet the deadline. If the deadline is missed, NHS England has put steps in place to ensure all hospices receive the funding within the timescales outlined. We, alongside key partners at our NHS England, will continue to proactively engage with our stakeholders, including the voluntary sector and independent hospices, on an ongoing basis in order to understand the issues they face. In fact, I recently visited Catherine House Hospice in Stafford and heard from staff how important our record investment has been to them. More widely, in February, I met key palliative and end-of-life care and hospice stakeholders in a roundtable format to discuss long-term sector sustainability within the context of our 10-year health plan. With regard to the issues that honourable members have raised around funding and the employer's national insurance contribution, I do absolutely recognise the concerns that they've raised. We inherited public finances in their worst state since the Second World War in July of last year, and we've taken necessary decisions to fix the foundations in the public finances at the autumn budget, enabling the spending review settlement of £22.6 billion increase or uplift in resource spending for the Department of Health and Social Care from 2023 outturn to 2025-2026. So I would gently point out to the party opposite that they, I believe, have welcomed that unprecedented settlement, but to my knowledge have been silent on their preferred means of generating that revenue. I would gently say to members opposite that you can't have it both ways. You can't welcome the £22.6 billion on the one hand, but then condemn on the other hand the way in which that money was raised without coming up with your own plan and your own proposals for how you would have raised those funds. I will give way.
I'm very grateful to the honourable member. The hospice sector is in quite a difficult place at the moment, and we've got to recognise that financially. However, if there is good advanced care planning, it means that money that is spent in secondary care currently could be reinvested into the hospice sector and into more community provision. Surely that it must be a first step in order to get not only better clinical outcomes, but also it being better for the whole of the palliative care pathway.
I thank her for that intervention. She speaks with tremendous and deep knowledge of the sector, and I also welcome the work she's doing, the task force on palliative and end-of-life care, and we very much look forward to seeing the outcomes and results of that task force. She's right that if we're going to make these three big shifts that are at the heart of our 10-year plan, the shift from hospital to community, from sickness to prevention, from analogue to digital, that is going to require a left shift in terms of both funding and reform so that we can deliver the 10-year plan. And it is absolutely right that we take a very hard-headed look at funding across our NHS and ensure that that funding is going to where it's needed. She will know that funding in terms of the funding share that hospitals get of overall NHS funding has gone up dramatically since the early 2000s to the detriment of primary care, community care, palliative care, all of the things that happen outside hospital. And that is something that we must address and we must shift upstream, because we will never solve the considerable challenges that our NHS is facing until we make that left shift. I would also note, in terms of the funding announcement, it was warmly welcomed by the sector. For example, Toby Porter, CEO of Hospice UK, said that today's announcement will be hugely welcomed, he said back when it was announced, by hospices and those who rely on their services. Hospices not only provide vital care for patients and families, but also relieve pressure on the NHS. This funding will allow hospices to continue to reach hundreds of thousands of people every year with high-quality, compassionate care. We look forward to working with the government to make sure everyone approaching the end of life gets the care and support they need, when and where they need it. So I hope that the measures I've outlined in my response to the Honourable Lady will go some way to reassuring all members of this government's unwavering commitment to the sustainability of the hospice and wider palliative and end-of-life care sector. I will give way.
I thank the Minister for outlining what the government is doing, but would the Minister consider looking at the exemption for the national insurance increase for workers and also allocating more funding directly to hospices so that they can actually conduct the palliative care that's needed in the out-of-hospital care provision? Because although the government may want to give it to palliative care, there is no directive that is doing so at this time, and could, aside from capital expenditure, so for operational costs, could there be more money allocated to hospices?
Minister.
I thank you for that intervention on the definition of where employers' national insurance will be levied. That definition is based on the Office of National Statistics definition of where it should be. It's the same definition that's been used by previous governments, so I don't think that point is up for debate. On her point, yeah.
Just to clarify, but the NHS and those staff within the NHS are exempt from the changes. So how is that part of the national statistical average when actually everyone in healthcare who is part of the NHS umbrella is actually exempt from these changes? All I'm asking for is for hospice, which is out of hospital care provision, which technically falls within adult social care. Couldn't that be incorporated in the exemptions already given to the NHS?
Minister.
The exemption was given to 100% full-time workers within the NHS, so in essence, hospitals. GPs, dentists, care providers are all, the ENICS is being levied on those other parts of the care, health and care sector. So in essence, across my portfolio, every aspect of my portfolio is seeing the ENICS being levied.
Just a suggestion to the Minister is integrating the staff working in hospices onto the NHS payroll. It would be that simple to exempt them from these national insurance increases.
Minister.
Well, in essence, the decisions on ENICS and where they're being levied have been made. I think it was made very clear that the line was drawn where it was drawn. So any attempt, I think, to try to reverse engineer where that line should be drawn would not really be aligned with the policy decisions that were made around the budget. Regarding her point on,
Jenkins.
I mean, was it actually the government's intention to put an additional tax on hospices? Is that exactly what the government intended to do, or is this an unforeseen consequence?
Minister.
I would not dare to speak from this dispatch box on behalf of the Chancellor, but I am absolutely clear that when the Chancellor did the autumn budget, she knew that she had to dig us out of a very, very deep hole indeed, and that required levying taxes that she had to levy, and the line had to be drawn somewhere, and that is where the line was drawn. In terms of her other questions, I think the funding has gone through Hospice UK, so it's not direct funding in that sense, but Hospice UK very kindly have coordinated the process because they're extremely well informed about which hospices across the country have got opportunities to upgrade their infrastructure, whether it's IT infrastructure, refurbishment, whatever it might be. And they reviewed those proposals, worked at tremendous pace, and as a result we've managed to deliver the entire £25 million of the first tranche, and we are now working closely with Hospice UK on the 75 million. And I'm very confident that that money will be out of the door and into hospices in very quick time this year, based on the outstanding performance on the first £25 million tranche. So I hope she'll be reassured on that point. So in closing, I do hope that we have got at least consensus around the vital importance of hospices. The government is absolutely committed to working at pace to ensure that we secure sustainability and solidity for the sector going forward. I would like to thank the Honourable Member once again for securing this important debate. I'd also like to thank and wish everybody in this chamber all the very best for recess, and look forward to seeing you all on the other side.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Order, order.